Truckers once swore by the engine at the heart of America's long-haul economy. Built by Detroit Diesel, it dominated the 90s, carried millions of loads across the country, and earned a reputation as the most trusted power plant on the road. But behind the scenes, overconfidence at the top, rushed engineering decisions, and a blind belief that nothing could kill this legend pushed the Series 60 into a crisis nobody saw coming. This is the story of how arrogance destroyed the engine that truckers trusted most. The Series 60 arrived when electronic engine controls were viewed with deep suspicion by truckers who preferred mechanical simplicity. Caterpillar's 3406 and Cummins Big Cam dominated the highways as proven engines that mechanics understood and drivers trusted. Detroit Diesel's decision to go fully electronic seemed like madness to industry observers who believed truckers would never accept computer-controlled engines. The gamble paid off spectacularly. The Detroit Diesel electronic control system didn't just work, it delivered fuel economy improvements that outperformed older mechanical engines, savings that translated to thousands of dollars annually for owner-operators. Fleet managers discovered they could program different power curves for city delivery versus long-haul operations. The system provided real-time diagnostics that pinpointed problems with unprecedented accuracy, dramatically reducing roadside failures compared to mechanical engines. What made truckers fall in love with the Series 60 wasn't just the technology. It was how Detroit Diesel treated them. The company's engineers spent months riding with drivers, learning what they needed from truck stops to loading docks. Sales representatives worked closely with fleet customers to optimize engine specifications for specific applications. When problems arose, Detroit Diesel responded quickly with solutions, not excuses. The engine's reputation spread through truck stops and CB radio chatter like wildfire. Drivers who had sworn by Caterpillar or Cummins for decades started switching to Detroit Diesel after hearing success stories from fellow truckers. Owner-operators discovered that Series 60-equipped trucks not only saved fuel, but also spent less time in repair shops, translating directly to increased earnings. The Series 60's electronic diagnostics revolutionized roadside repairs. Instead of guessing at problems, mechanics could plug in diagnostic equipment and receive precise fault codes that identified failing components. This capability was particularly valuable for long-haul drivers operating far from their home terminals, where accurate diagnosis meant the difference between a quick repair and days of downtime. Fleet maintenance managers embraced the Series 60's predictive capabilities, which allowed them to schedule repairs before components failed completely. This proactive approach reduced emergency breakdowns and helped fleets maintain consistent delivery schedules. The engine's modular design meant that major components could be serviced without removing the entire power plant, further reducing maintenance costs and downtime. By 1995, the Series 60 had achieved something rare in trucking: broad industry acceptance across major fleets. Companies like Schneider National and J.B. Hunt began equipping large portions of their fleets with it, citing reliability and fuel economy as deciding factors. Regional carriers adopted it for its versatility and mixed-duty applications. Even independent owner-operators, traditionally the most conservative buyers, embraced the Series 60 after witnessing its performance firsthand. The engine's success created a virtuous cycle that reinforced its market dominance. As more trucks were equipped with Series 60s, parts availability improved and service expertise expanded. Mechanics became familiar with the engine's characteristics, making repairs faster and more accurate. Used truck buyers specifically sought out Series 60-equipped vehicles, knowing they were getting proven reliability. Detroit Diesel's executives watched their market share climb from single digits to around 35% in less than a decade. The Series 60 had not only succeeded, it had redefined what success looked like in the heavy-duty engine market. This unprecedented achievement would prove to be both their greatest triumph and the source of their eventual downfall. Market dominance bred a dangerous arrogance within Detroit Diesel's corporate culture. Executives stopped viewing the Series 60 as a product that required continuous improvement and started treating it as an untouchable franchise. The engineering discipline that had created the engine's success was gradually replaced by corporate hubris that assumed customer loyalty was permanent and unshakable. Industry insiders later described a management team drunk on its own success. Marketing presentations boasted about owning the long-haul segment, with executives openly dismissing competitors as irrelevant. Engineering budgets gradually shifted toward new development programs instead of refinements to the Series 60. When field reports surfaced about minor issues with certain configurations, management dismissed them as isolated incidents that didn't warrant significant attention or resources. The company's relationship with customers began to sour as Detroit Diesel became less responsive to feedback from the field. Fleet managers who had built their operations around Series 60 reliability found their concerns increasingly dismissed by sales representatives, who seemed more interested in pushing new sales than addressing existing problems. When Schneider National's maintenance director raised questions about elevated operating temperatures in certain high-mileage applications, he was curtly told the engines were performing within specifications, and that problems were likely due to improper maintenance procedures. This response marked a fundamental shift in corporate philosophy. The company that had built its reputation on customer partnership and collaborative problem-solving was now telling its most loyal customers they were wrong. The arrogance was palpable in every interaction, from sales meetings to technical support calls. The dismissive attitude extended to Detroit Diesel's view of competition. When Caterpillar rolled out the C-15 in 1999, a refined successor to its electronically controlled 3406E, Detroit Diesel leadership mocked it internally as too little too late, convinced truckers would never abandon the Series 60 platform. That overconfidence blinded the company to legitimate competitive threats and kept them from responding when it mattered. Engineering decisions that had once required extensive testing and field validation were now made based on computer models and management assumptions. The Series 60's original development had taken nearly 6 years of careful prototype testing and gradual rollout to selected fleets. By the late 1990s, significant changes were being implemented with minimal field testing, justified by management's belief that the engine's robust design could handle any modification without consequence. Customer service transformed from collaboration to condescension. Sales representatives who had once worked closely with fleets to understand their specific needs began pushing standardized configurations, arguing that the Series 60's versatility made customization unnecessary. The message was clear. Detroit Diesel's engineers knew better than their customers what they needed, and questioning that expertise was unwelcome. When competitors like Cummins began expanding warranty coverage and simplifying claims processes to attract customers, Detroit Diesel went the opposite direction. They tightened warranty terms and implemented more restrictive maintenance requirements, reasoning that the Series 60 was so reliable that extensive warranties were unnecessary. Any problems that did occur were obviously the result of operator error or inadequate maintenance, not design flaws. This systematic dismissal of customer concerns created resentment among the very people who had made the Series 60 successful. Mechanics who had once praised Detroit Diesel's responsiveness began complaining about technical representatives who questioned their competence. Fleet managers who had been treated as partners now felt like adversaries whose loyalty was taken for granted. The warning signs were everywhere, but Detroit Diesel's leadership was too intoxicated by success to notice. Their arrogance had convinced them that the Series 60 was invincible, that customer loyalty was permanent, and that their engineering superiority was unquestionable. This overconfidence set the stage for a miscalculation that would destroy everything they had built. When the Environmental Protection Agency announced new emission standards for 2002, requiring significant reductions in nitrogen oxide and particulate matter emissions, Detroit Diesel's executives saw opportunity where they should have seen danger. The company's response to the emissions challenge revealed the full extent of their arrogance. Instead of the methodical, customer-focused approach that had made the original Series 60 successful, Detroit Diesel rushed to implement exhaust gas recirculation technology that had been proven in smaller, lighter-duty engines, but never validated in the demanding environment of long-haul trucking. Management was convinced that the Series 60's legendary reputation could survive any modification, no matter how hastily implemented. When Detroit Diesel's own engineering team raised serious concerns about the compressed development timeline, Warning that insufficient testing could compromise the reliability that had made the Series 60 famous, management dismissed their warnings with barely concealed contempt. The engineers who had created the Series 60's success were told that the engine's proven design could accommodate any emissions equipment without significant problems. The decision to proceed was driven by blind conviction and a fear of losing market share to competitors who might reach the market first. The first EGR-equipped Series 60 engines began reaching customers in mid-2002, and the problems emerged almost immediately. Fleet maintenance managers reported unusual oil consumption patterns, premature turbocharger failures, and cooling system issues that had never existed in previous Series 60 configurations. The EGR system's complexity introduced dozens of new failure modes, from clogged coolers to faulty temperature sensors, each capable of causing expensive breakdowns that left drivers stranded. Detroit Diesel's handling of these early problems revealed how deeply their stubbornness had taken root. Rather than acknowledging potential design flaws, the company blamed maintenance practices and issued technical bulletins that imposed stricter service intervals and procedures, essentially shifting the burden of its engineering missteps onto customers. This response alienated mechanics and fleet managers who had successfully maintained Series 60s for years without such complications. Turbocharger failures spiked as the EGR system introduced chronic back pressure and additional thermal load, putting stresses on turbo components that the original Series 60 design was never built to handle. When fleet managers complained about the increased maintenance costs, they were told that environmental protection required sacrifices and that sophisticated operators would understand the necessity. The arrogance was breathtaking. Detroit Diesel was charging customers premium prices for engines that required more maintenance, while simultaneously lecturing them about their environmental responsibilities. The electronic control system that had once been the Series 60's greatest competitive advantage became a liability as it struggled to manage the complex interactions between EGR flow rates, fuel injection timing, and turbocharger boost pressure. Software updates were released monthly as engineers attempted to optimize the system through trial and error. But each update seemed to create new problems while attempting to solve old ones. Mechanics complained they needed constant retraining to keep up with the evolving diagnostic procedures. But Detroit Diesel insisted the complexity was necessary for emissions compliance and that competent technicians would adapt. Cooling system failures escalated dramatically as EGR-equipped engines ran significantly hotter than their predecessors. Radiators that had provided adequate cooling for previous Series 60s proved insufficient for the increased heat rejection of EGR engines. Head gasket problems, once virtually unheard of in Series 60 applications, began appearing in fleets that had never seen them before as thermal cycling pushed the engine beyond its original design limits. Many fleets shortened oil change intervals from 25,000 miles to around 15,000 or less to prevent sludge buildup, erasing much of the fuel economy advantage that had drawn them to the Series 60. Through it all, Detroit Diesel insisted the engines were functioning exactly as designed, dismissing early failures as isolated. By now, a false sense of invincibility had shaped every major decision at Detroit Diesel, keeping the company from realizing they were dismantling the very engine they once perfected. Detroit Diesel's response to mounting field problems revealed how completely ego had replaced engineering integrity within the company. Instead of acknowledging fundamental design flaws and working to correct them, the company doubled down on blaming customers for problems that were clearly the result of rushed engineering and inadequate testing. Warranty claims were scrutinized with adversarial intensity, with company representatives questioning the competence of mechanics who had successfully serviced Detroit Diesel products for decades without incident. The company that had once prided itself on customer partnership and collaborative problem-solving was now systematically gaslighting its most loyal supporters. Fleet managers who had built their businesses around Series 60 reliability watched their maintenance costs skyrocket, while Detroit Diesel representatives insisted that everything was normal and that increased maintenance was simply the price of environmental compliance. Schneider National, once Detroit Diesel's most vocal supporter and a showcase customer, began quietly evaluating alternative engines as their Series 60 fleet experienced unprecedented downtime and repair costs. Independent owner-operators who had trusted the company with their livelihoods and invested their life savings in Series 60 equipped trucks found themselves stranded with complex engines that local repair shops couldn't diagnose or fix properly. When they complained about the problems, Detroit diesel representatives suggested they weren't sophisticated enough to operate modern emissions-compliant equipment properly, essentially blaming them for their own financial hardship. The diagnostic system that once made mechanics' jobs easier became increasingly burdensome as EGR-era engines introduced more complex software logic and frequent updates that overwhelmed independent shops trying to stay current. By 2003, the trucking industry's patience with Detroit diesel was at its limit. Trade publications that had once celebrated the company's engineering excellence began publishing scathing articles about reliability problems and customer service failures. Online forums filled with complaints from drivers who felt betrayed by a company they had trusted with their careers and financial futures. The arrogance that had convinced Detroit diesel executives they were untouchable was now driving away customers in unprecedented numbers. The tipping point came when several major fleets quietly began diversifying their engine purchases, ending years of Series 60 exclusivity. Detroit diesel's damage control misfired as warranty costs surged and technical fixes lagged. Internal reports documented mounting expenses tied to EGR-related failures, yet management continued framing them as statistical anomalies. Press releases claiming that EGR system problems were isolated incidents affecting only a small percentage of engines were immediately contradicted by mounting warranty claims and field reports from across the country. The company's continued insistence that engines were performing within specifications became a running joke among mechanics dealing with daily breakdowns and frustrated customers. The engineering team that had created the original Series 60's legendary success found themselves completely marginalized as management focused on public relations spin rather than fundamental solutions to the problems they had created. Proposals for comprehensive redesigns that might have salvaged the situation were rejected as implicit admissions of failure that would damage the company's reputation. Instead, Detroit Diesel continued releasing incremental software patches and minor updates, desperately hoping to engineer their way out of a crisis that had been caused by their own arrogance and rushed decision-making.